to talk about. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Gloria Moore, President of Greater Atlanta Democratic Women, and it is my pleasure to present our annual legislative review, the good, the bad, and the unfortunate ugly. We have with us this evening representatives and a senator who just survived the 2024 legislative session. So we are so proud of you and so glad you made it through. I see a few scars here and there, and but you're warriors, and women have to be warriors, and that's, thank God that's the case, that you are. So we're glad you're here this evening. This is going to be fairly informal because, yes, we're looking for the women's view and we're looking for your sincere, impression of what just happened and what will happen in the future. And so the way we're going to do that this evening, it's not, you don't get 2 minutes to speak. So don't worry about the time. I know in most forums that's how it is, but that's not how we're doing this. So we want you to feel pretty comfortable about what you say. Of course, we are recording, and we're going to be putting the recording on Greater Atlanta Democratic Women's Facebook page so that people can see it who weren't able to be here this evening. And so as we have people join and they want to put questions in the chat, that's fine, although we may not have time for questions. We will try to keep this to an hour. But again, with the legislators that we have here, I happen to know all of you can talk for the entire hour all by yourself. So fortunately, we have some time. I'm going to be turning this program over to Hillary Lind. And Hillary is the Greater Atlanta Democratic Women's Program Vice Chair. So she's going to be moderating, and mostly just to kind of keep the discussion focused. Okay. So at this time, Hillary, I think I'll just turn the mic to you, and let you speak to our guests this evening.
All right. Thank you, Gloria. And thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. We definitely appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to, to have a chat with us and sit down with us this evening. I want to start with Representative Viola Davis. I want to start asking you questions first. First, we want to start off with the ugly. What was the worst that you experienced this year in the legislative session?
I think that the worst for me dealt with education. I've always been one that's been involved with advocating for education and improving the overall funding of the QBE. And you'll find that in the news, they're going to once again say that the QBE is fully funded. But what they don't tell many of the taxpayers and voters is that there's two types of funding. You have adequate funding, and then you have fully funded. Now, some would say, well, can you prove that it hasn't been fully funded? I would say simply look at transportation, whether you're looking at urban transportation or your rural counties. We did a fiscal note. Now, fiscal note, for those of you who don't know what a fiscal note is when you do legislation. I did legislation, said I want transportation fully funded every year, and I want it to be placed in the law. Well, they did a fiscal note to see how much that would cost, and came back to be just over $1 billion. Well, I do commend the governor for doing $200 million, but when you talk about there being an surplus of over $11 billion, we could have afforded to fully fund transportation. And so when you won't fully fund education, which is going to improve the overall education of our children, who are our future, then we have a problem. I'm hoping that this will improve the following session and that we fully fund the QBE, starting off with the transportation and then move on to students living in poverty. We only needed about 90 million to fully fund that. So for me, the worst thing is when you won't fully fund education for our children. Right now, we're just doing an inadequate job.
Thank you for that, Representative Davis. I really appreciate your insight. We're going to jump over to Representative Roberts, and I'm not sure if you're not speaking, if you could please put your mics on mute. Thank you. And Representative Roberts, same question to you. What was the worst that you've experienced this year in the legislative session?
There was a lot, but I think as far as my biggest disappointment was we finally had them talking about Medicaid expansion. And even up until the final couple of days, we thought we might get it done. Being one of, I think we're down to 9 states that has not expanded. I think it's fiscally irresponsible. It's cruel. I just saw an article a couple of weeks ago that 18 more rural hospitals are in critical shape and going to have to close soon. And with the governor saying, just let my Pathways program work a little longer when, he's got, I think, no more than 5,000 people signed up, but yet it's cost us 26 million in administration. Our U.S. senators, Warnock and Ossoff, worked really hard to get $1.2 billion for us in the ARPA funds so that the first 2 years would basically be covered. And then the improved health outcomes in all these other states, if you review the studies, they show that it begins to pay for itself just because we want healthy, hardworking Georgians, and they can't work and provide for their family if they're not healthy. And so that was really, I guess it was encouraging that we finally had a conversation, but they disappointed me that they didn't do the right thing this year, because I just don't feel like Georgians can wait much longer and these hospitals can wait much longer. So.
Thank you for that. All right, so next up is Senator Halpern. What was the worst of this year's session for you?
Well, much like my colleagues, I was going to talk about the Medicaid expansion. That was really a big frustration because of the way that we were able to get the conversation going. In the Senate, I'm just going to piggyback a little bit off of what Rep Roberts just shared, and then I'll give a different answer. But in the Senate, we were actually really trying to work and negotiate being able to get a hearing. And we got a hearing on Medicaid expansion. And we felt very, very good about the bill that we had designed with advocacy groups and really using Speaker Burns' bill on Medicaid as a baseline for having that discussion. We went into that hearing in regulated industries and expected a vote. And we were actually really hopeful that we were going to get a positive vote and that bill was going to move out of the committee that it was assigned to. And it was extraordinarily frustrating because that didn't happen. At the end of the day, when push came to shove, we did not get a successful vote that would have moved that bill out of committee on to the possibility of having it come onto the floor. And that it's very, very frustrating. I will say that I have started to talk about that bill though, and I do want to share the win aspect, which is that we were able to get a hearing at all. This is the first time in 14 years that we were able to get a Medicaid expansion bill heard in committee. We were able to get on record senators, Republican senators, who said it is time for us to expand Medicaid. And it is the right thing to do for Georgians. And we were able to get that on the record. We were able to actually get a vote on the bill. And the vote ended up being a tied vote, 7-7. And so it did not pass. Of course, the little inside baseball there is that I believe that the chairman voted and created the tie, when usually chairmen are only supposed to break ties, but never you mind. But we were able to get a 7-7 vote on a topic that we really hadn't had traction, and we were really hopeful that this would be the year. What I think is that it at least starts to allow us to crack the code. We've now got a governor who is on record, I think in the last couple of days, who has literally said, I am in the no camp on Medicaid expansion. I think that there is a lot of work that we can do around that statement alone, really making sure that people understand that he is not open to this idea at all, in favor of his Pathways to Coverage program, which is not signing up the kind of people that were told that it would. I believe, Roberts, I think you just said 3,000 people out of the 600,000 that would be eligible. The cost of this program is much more expensive than expanding Medicaid. And so it at least gives us the opportunity to continue to have this conversation in a really viable way, and let Georgians know that there are people beyond just Democrats in this General Assembly who believe the time is now, but really allowed kind of the governor's personal pet project to be the driving force as to what happened this year. So that's Medicaid expansion. I also wanted to lift up education as being an area of frustration for me as well. Both on the higher education side and also the K or pre-K through 12. I had a piece of legislation that dealt specifically with our historically Black colleges and universities. That bill did get out of the Senate, but did not clear the House. So I'm disappointed by that, but we'll continue to do that work to make sure that those schools are able to continue to grow and be sustainable for the next generations upon generations of students. But we passed a bill on the K-12 side that is a voucher bill. For any of you who have been following along on this school choice movement, and I put it in quotes only because most of us really are in agreement, right, that there should be choice. We want every student to be successful. We want every student to have a future ahead of them. And so the school choice language has gotten away from us a bit, but every year we have been dealing with a voucher bill. And a voucher bill really is a bill that takes public dollars and transfers them to private schools, generally to private schools. So last year, you might recall that really the House did a phenomenal job in being able to stop that bill. That bill, SB 233, passed in the Senate last year, and a coalition of Republicans and Democrats together in the House got that bill killed for last year. But it wasn't dead. So it came back again this year. And this year, unfortunately, that coalition was not able to be maintained. That is a bill that went to the governor's desk, and he has now signed it. But it effectively gives parents $6,500 that they can use toward schooling outside of public schools. So if you're homeschooling, you could use it for that. If you want to put your child in private school, you can. The key here is that families who live in districts that who are zoned in districts where the school is in the bottom 25% of performing schools in the state, therefore qualify. You do not need to put your child in your public school for not a day before you are able to get the money. And and I'm going to use myself as an example. I used to live in a neighborhood, a wonderful neighborhood, but our school, our local elementary school, is in fact today still in the bottom 25%. It's a great middle class neighborhood. The school, when my oldest son, who's now a sophomore in college, was going off to kindergarten, we did make the choice to move him to a private school, which we then paid for. Today, because of this voucher program, I would still be able to get the $6,500, whether I can afford to send him to private school or not, and apply that towards the tuition. And what we found is that in other states, these vouchers often end up being a transference of dollars to parents who are wealthy or who can already afford to send their kids to private schools. And so we have a lot of concern. I think we all share a lot of concern about that bill. It is a bill that ultimately really passed along party lines for the most part, maybe with the exception of one. And so now we really need to just take a look and see what the impact's going to be. But $6,500 can now trail your child from kindergarten all the way through 12th grade, and they don't ever have to set foot in your public school. That is a frustrating bill for me. I was extremely disappointed to see that we weren't able to beat that back. And I say that thing passed in the Senate last year. It was going to pass in the Senate again this year, but it was gratifying to know that there were both Republicans and Democrats alike who understand the difficulties with vouchers and who really recognize the challenges that they've posed in other states. And I suppose now that the governor signed it, we're gonna have to just track it and see really what are the either unintended consequences or just the consequences in general for Georgia students and Georgia parents.
That was my gonna be my other one. They were tied, Medicaid and
I know.
voucher. We did put, it's a horrible bill. I'm not justifying it all, but there were some guardrails that were put on towards the end. I think there was an income number. Was it 180 for family making 180? They couldn't get it or something.
I don't. We'll come back. I'll verify while we can keep on talking.
And then I think they put some standard, like reporting standards, which I was concerned about, that we were giving money to schools that would have no obligation to report anything to the state as far as how they were educating our kids. And then I know there's a map of where the I know you're in Atlanta, but a lot of these underperforming schools are out in the rural areas, and there are no private schools that are in those areas. So I think it's going to be a colossal failure. And it's a shame that we couldn't hold it off one more year, but I'm sure the numbers will start to show that pretty quickly.
We need to also remember that we have been underfunding education in Georgia for 2 decades to the tune of practically $10 billion. If you want to finance private schools, just don't take the money out of the public schools that have already been underfunded. That's not a hard ask. We need to properly fund our education system, as I stated before.
And remember too, just to piggyback on that, remember too that we've already got these scholarship organizations. So there really are already public dollars that are already going to private schools. We've got the program that allows a dollar for dollar write off on your Georgia taxes, state taxes owed, if you you got to go through the process, but basically if you give a donation to a private school, and it's a list of schools, some of them are the traditional privates, others are religious private institutions, but we've already got, I think it's currently today, a $120 million pool of funds that we're already pulling away from our general operating budget that we could allocate to other things to allow those dollars to flow directly to private schools. So we are already using what could be public taxpayer dollars in this effort. And we have now just added this additional pool of money that is also going to be coming out of this money for sure is going to be coming out of what should be the public education system. The other pot of money could be money that goes into the public education system.
Thank you for that. It seems like we have a lot to overcome from this year's legislative session. So kind of sticking in that area a little bit, Senator Halpern, what was some of the bad bills that passed that you may be able to let us know about?
So, we just talked about the voucher bill. I am going to point to, SB 63, which is a bill related to cash bail and cash bail reform. You may recall that over the years, and particularly, honestly, when Governor Deal was governor, there was quite a bit of work that was done around criminal justice reform. And we seem to be sliding backwards away from those efforts and becoming much more restrictive, adding much really criminalizing more people in different kinds of ways. Again, that's tended to be a trend over the last few years, certainly in my time in the General Assembly. So this bill adds to the number of offenses that require a cash bail. And so, I think we took it from 10 offenses to something like, I don't want to misstate how many, but I want to say it's like we went from 10 to 55 different offenses that now will require you to pay cash bail in order to get released, as opposed to being able to do a signature release. Some of those crimes that are now identified are misdemeanors. I mean, these are not all, felonies. These are not all aggravated crimes that you would expect to have cash bail. Some of these are misdemeanors as well. We worry, of course, that it criminalizes people who don't have the money to pay. And it really will have the impact of exacerbating the number of people in jail. I am in Fulton County. Fulton County Jail has had its fair share of stories on the news in terms of overcrowding, but this kind of bill will in fact contribute to worsening that problem, as people who cannot afford to pay their cash bail will not be allowed to get out and will have to remain in jail, even for crimes that, we wouldn't be worried about them skipping town and not showing back up for court.
Wow, thank you for that. Representative Roberts, what are some of your thoughts on some of the bad bills that passed that we need to be made aware of?
So there was a series of bills targeted at immigrants, and everything, I forget the numbers, I'm horrible. I think it was 1105, which essentially requires the local government, police departments, and law enforcement to essentially coordinate and do ICE's job, to detain, to check whether or not they're legal, to fill out these silly reports. And if they don't, then they can lose state and federal funding, one thing. So that bill, Republicans are defunding the police. And then the other thing is it put a misdemeanor and an aggravated misdemeanor if the jailers and law enforcement are not filling out the records. So we're criminalizing yet again another workforce area that is already in a shortage. And so I think that was really dangerous. And then just, the added impact, of course, on our American and legal residents here who are going to get rolled into that danger just because of the way they look. And then the alien land law bill was another one, trying to preclude corporations or people affiliated with certain countries that were on the Secretary of Commerce's list as, I forget, was it called enemies of the state or something like that? Not actual companies that the Secretary of Defense has identified, but whole countries that they couldn't buy land within 10 miles of a military base or our ports. And I don't think any of us want to allow someone who wants to cause harm to Americans to be able to taint our food supply, because it was targeted towards agricultural. But the silly thing was, if you leased the land, you were fine. If you were doing experimental testing for products and growing techniques, then you could do it. And then the other thing was, it said a corporation that was, I think, 25% owned by one of these countries. Well, first of all, we know in Delaware that you can set up a corporation and then set up another corporation under that. And by the time it gets to Georgia, you would never know that it was from that corporation. And the reality is that anybody that really wanted to harm Americans, they were going to use a straw buyer anyway. So these were all part of this national message that is going on about the border, to say that Joe Biden is not doing his job at the border, even though we know that our other our other candidate for president is the one that told Republicans not to support bipartisan legislation that would have solved it. And so this is just more of that messaging. So that was really disappointing that we targeted. It feels like we target, or they target and successfully target one group a year. They target a lot of them, but they, last session it was our trans community, trans kids. They still targeted them this time, but we stopped those. But the ones that got the brunt of it were our immigrant communities this time. So it was disappointing.
Thank you for that, Representative Roberts. And Representative Davis, what are some of the bad bills that you think that passed that you feel like we need to be made aware of?
Once again, our voting rights was under attack. And I mean, they're going to continue to attack our right to vote. Starting off with House Bill, I believe it was 1207. It makes it legal for them to have fewer voting machines. And we know that that has always been a problem, especially within the Black community. And not to mention House Bill 189 with those mass voter challenge. I went to the Board of Election meeting, and one of the people was there challenging a list. And one of the people that on that list stood up, and it was a fellow vet. And he said that he was homeless. And at the time he started cutting hair, and the place where he was working allowed him to use that address so that he can vote. He said that once he was on his feet, he would be able to then use a different address. But if that veteran was not at that meeting to defend himself, he would have been kicked off the roll. And I'm saying to you, for one vet to be denied the right to vote is truly, truly something that should never, never, ever happen. So the fact that our voting rights was under attack is something we're going to have to repeal all of this when it's our turn.
Thank you for that. Yes, it definitely seems like voting rights, immigration, and cash bill seems to be a reoccurring theme here in Georgia. So I appreciate your insight with that. Now back with starting with you, Representative Davis, what were some of the good bills that you think that we need to be made aware of?
Well, they had a number of veteran bills that were really pretty good. A lot of people don't understand is that as veterans, when we go from one state or another, fulfilling our obligation under the military, we often have to get the license for that particular state. Well, we passed a law where our license is good, even though it's from another state. I'm sorry, I don't have that bill in front of me. And also with that, I am happy about the squatters bill. There's a lot of people who just been going into people's property and deciding to take it over, falsifying a lease and saying that they live there. House Bill 1017, the Georgia Squatters Reform Act, would make it where we can get people out quickly. I think it was on the news that a veteran was out serving her country and somebody went in and took over her home while she was overseas. this kind of thing, that no homeowner should have to worry about someone taking over their property when they shouldn't be there.
Thank you, Representative Davis. Representative Roberts, what are some good bills that passed that we should be able to cheer on now?
I know I'm blanking. I guess I'm thinking more of the ones that we blocked, because I was kind of being in leadership this session or this term was interesting, because I got to see kind of behind the scenes how we I strongly believe our advocates at the Capitol, emailing and calling and all of that, had a lot of pressure as well. But we in the House, we are close enough in margin now that anything that requires a 2/3 vote, they need us. They can't get it without us, whether it's a local homestead exemption or they're amending the Constitution in some way. And so we were able to hold those hostage on sine die, and we were able to block all of the anti-LGBTQ and trans bills. And then we held strong as a caucus on the Clarence Thomas statute being put on the Capitol steps, and they sent it back to rules, and they tried to get us, strong arm us into agreeing to allow it to go over to the Nathan Deal Justice Center, and they were going to do kind of a group of the Supreme Court justices that have come from Georgia, and the others were all slave owners, so I mean, yeah, it's bad. And so we just decided that this was, a hill we were going to die on together, and I was proud to be on that hill too, because he's a horrible human being. And it never, because we delayed them on that and they had to send it back to rules, it never came back. And so that was really positive. I know there were good bills, and I'm sorry, I'm just blanking right now, but let's go to Sonia, and I'll try and Senator Halpern, and I'll try and remember. I know there were great bills that we passed this year.
Oh, no, that's still perfect. Delaying that is better than anything else. So, but Senator Halpern, what are some good bills that you think that we need to be made aware of?
Well, following in the track of Representative Davis, I wanted to talk more about some of the bills that fall into the workforce development area. And she mentioned the veterans and licensing. Last year, during the interim in the Senate, there were a number of different study committees, and I got to sit on 3 of them that really have to do with expanding Georgia's workforce and licensing reform. You'll recall that the Secretary of State has the responsibility for most all of the business licenses that people will receive in the state. And what we were trying to do is make sure that we streamline the process, that we take away whatever barriers there may be to allow people to more quickly get to work after they've done the training and the testing that they need to do. And we had a number of bills that did pass in this regard. One of them specifically deals with licensing for out-of-state veterinarians, streamlines that process if you're moving in from out of state. Again, on military personnel, particularly military medical personnel, healthcare is a high demand career area that we've been focused a lot on in the General Assembly, because we do not have enough people, regardless if you're talking about doctors, if you're talking about nurses, if you're talking about technicians. We do not have enough people who right now are in those jobs. We have more jobs than there are people. So we want to streamline that, particularly for now retired military medical personnel with their licensing requirements. Often you have to start over, and we don't recognize enough the experience that you've already had or the training. And so this bill will allow our military medical personnel who are retired to provisionally operate within the scope of their practice for 12 months without having to meet the exam needs, so that they can still be working, and we need them to, while they're going through the examination process. We have expedited the license process for family and marriage therapists on the mental health side. We do need more people who are able to provide those services. So we're expediting those licenses for family and marriage therapists along with social workers. We are working to increase employment opportunities for individuals with disabilities and make sure that they are being paid fairly for the work that they're doing through a piece of legislation that's recognized as the GAME Act, which stands for Georgia as a Model Employer. And then we also, because second chances are something that we should give to people, we did also pass a bill that would improve our licensing application process for those with criminal records to be able to know upfront, or to have a better sense upfront, if they spend the money and the time to do the training that they want to do, will they in fact be able to get the license in the end? We heard heartbreaking stories about people who literally came back after serving their time, enrolled in our technical college system, into different kinds of programs, did all of the work, spent the money and the time, got to the end of that, took the test, passed the test, and then when they had to go before the licensing board, were told that because of the kind of crime that they had committed, they will not be granted a license. Well, we don't want to do that to people. So this bill would, again, allow people to have much more visibility upfront as to whether or not this really is a track that they should pursue or not. And just as a reminder, because Georgia has a larger population that is still being overseen by our correctional or under correctional control, can impact 40% of Georgia adults. 40% of Georgia adults have criminal records. So I'm really happy about that. That bill has been a long time coming, and finally it was able to get over the line. So that one's a good one. And then if I could give, so that's a suite of bills. And if I could just name one more, I want to call out HB 404, which is the Safe at Home Act. And that one is one that, again, if you want to talk about a multi-year effort, there were, I believe it was 35 organizations that came together over years to determine what were the most important things that they would want to see in a bill to protect tenants' rights. Really, this is a tenants' rights bill. We want to make sure that the premises are fit for habitation. And by that, I mean have running water, have a carbon monoxide or a fire alarm installed. Gosh, I'm trying to think of some of the other qualities that a home or an apartment must have in order to be deemed rentable and habitable. But this is a really important bill. And like I said, it has been a long, long time coming. It also caps the refundable security deposit that you would have to put up to rent at 2 months rent. And it requires written notice on a right to cure non-payment of rent before a landlord can actually begin to file or start the eviction process. So Georgia is known as a state that really gives the landlords much more rights than the tenants. And this is a bill that is meant to start to right the balance between those two. So this was an exciting one. And like I said, 35 different advocacy organizations really worked in unison to come up with an agreement. Now, there are other things. This should not be the end of our work, but this is the beginning and a really great first step and good start.
I'd like to ask a question about the gun storage law. Can someone respond to that?
Unfortunately, it had that one subcommittee hearing with no vote, and it died. It never made it across the finish line. So very disappointing.
The interesting thing, though, that I think is worth saying, there was a bill on both the House and the Senate side. So there is maybe an interesting thing that is afoot around us recognizing that we need to do something. I think a hearing is great because we hadn't been able to get any hearings before.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah.
There was a bill, I know in the Senate, a Republican senator, Senator Patrick, introduced a bill that would have offered a tax credit for anybody who bought a firearm storage box or lockbox, but firearm safety equipment to incent people, in fact, to do that. And that $300 tax credit, I think, pretty much was thought to would cover the actual cost of the unit. So maybe
that originated from Rep. Al, by the way.
Yeah, yes.
I just want to be clear.
Yes, that's absolutely right. But there were two different bills, one in the House, and that was a Democratic bill, correct?
It started that way, and then Representative Hilton took it. So yeah.
So we know that this is a Democratic bill, but it's interesting to note that two Republicans took that bill and introduced it. So I don't know if that's a sign of anything, but for sure, this is a topic that we need to continue to talk about and continue to push people on, because gun violence is an epidemic. A lot of our car break-ins are for people who are looking to steal guns out of cars, which contributes to the gun violence epidemic. So no luck this year.
Well, I will say that Rep. Hilton's district is one of the closest margins. And so I suspect one of the things that I noticed after Amy St. Pierre was murdered in Midtown in the doctor's office was at that press conference, there were women in the audience with signs that said Republican Moms for Change. And now I believe there is a bipartisan group even beyond Moms Demand Action. And so you are seeing both sides of the aisle say, we're going to elect people that are in favor of common sense gun safety. And so I think it will be interesting to see this election, whether some people are held accountable for the fact that we've been trying year after year after year, filing bills, red flag bills, child safety bills. I filed a bill for domestic violence. People convicted of domestic violence couldn't have guns and couldn't even get a hearing on that. So I agree that we are talking about it more and we will never stop talking about it. That was the reason I ran in 2018, was after Parkland. And we just have to keep trying to elect more people so that the numbers shift enough that we can start making some true change. So
I also want to add that we have not spoken about reproductive rights yet. And as usual, people want to control the body of a woman. I tell you, I'm the first to say that I was raised by my family. They would often say, we do not have abortions in this family. If you have a baby, have the baby, and that's part of our legacy, and someone in the family will raise that child. But I'm the first to say, I am not ready to criminalize women in crisis. We're going to have to rethink a lot of this because we have women dying. We have women that can't get the proper medical care. The maternal mortality rate in Georgia is high. So we need to protect women instead of criminalizing them.
I agree. I guess that was another disappointment, but I don't know that it was as surprising as, getting so far on Medicaid. But, we filed in 2023 in both chambers, the Reproductive Freedom Act. And we've continued to push on that. We've had faith leaders there. We've had all of the various groups and abortion providers. I couldn't even get a room in the Capitol for the hearing that we held this year to get an update, because it had been basically a year since HB 481 had gone into effect. And we had doctors and ultrasound providers and people who had to leave the state for abortions, and faith leaders come and speak at this hearing that we had to have, ironically, at the church across the street. We paid to rent the church to have a hearing. Last I checked, the big gold dome building is supposed to be the people's house, and it's just a shame that they aren't willing to talk about that. And then Representative Sarah Draper and I also drafted and filed the Representative Democracy Protection Act, I think is what it was. I'm sorry, because we were established as a representative democracy, and we're watching across the country these ballot initiatives and referendums, and Georgia's constitution doesn't allow for it. And so I went through all the 24 states and picked out the best parts from all of theirs. And I drafted a constitutional amendment and enabling legislation, because I think when we see polls across the state with 60 to 80% wanting abortion access, wanting common sense guns, wanting Medicaid expansion, wanting to protect the Okefenokee, not wanting school vouchers, that is where you say, oh my goodness, we are no longer a representative democracy. They are beholden to special interest groups, and it's time for something more drastic, which is what this process was set up for. And I made it very difficult threshold to meet, because it should be an extreme circumstance. And of course, that didn't get a hearing either. So we have got to this over the next few months. I truly believe our number one goal is to get out to every target district in every part of Georgia and remind people that we can listen to Trump and Biden talk about national, we can listen to Congress talk about national, but until we change the nature of the Supreme Court, whatever the feds do, the Supreme Court can overturn. It's pushed down to the states. The power is in the state legislatures right now and for a while, and there's nothing more important than we can do but elect pro-choice state legislators across the state so that we can restore women's reproductive freedom.
Like to the facts, what's that, House Bill 71, which is the Okefenokee, the swamp bill.
Right.
You had over 95 Republicans and Democrats sign on to that bill, yet it could not get one committee hearing. I had a number of people contact me telling me to protect the swamp. And I want them to know we couldn't even get a committee hearing, even though we had more than the 91 needed to pass the bill. So that's the danger of politics. Yeah. That's how bad politics can be.
Yep.
Can I add one other bill that I just want to put on people's radar? It's not a bill, sorry, it's a resolution, and it's really a study committee that I'm really excited about and hope to get appointed to. The Senate is going to be doing a study committee on access to affordable childcare. And I think that is going to be really interesting. One of the things that we know when we talk about women is how many women fell out of the workforce when COVID hit. In general, but also how expensive childcare is, and how oftentimes if you are the person who is not making as much money in a two-income household, when you balance what it's going to cost to send your child to daycare versus what you're going to make, a lot of people are doing that math, and oftentimes the expense of childcare does not make it viable for them to go to work. I mean, they basically be working to pay for their kid to be in daycare and childcare, have childcare. And so this is an area that I really think that the state needs to put more attention to. It is going to be a funding issue as well. And so I'm excited about that work and look forward, when we get back into next year or at the end of this year, being able to share some of the findings that came out of that study committee. And hopefully there will be recommendations that we then bring to life in the next legislative session.
You did remind me of a good bill. We expanded Paid Family Leave Act for state employees. So we're setting a very good example. We went from 6 weeks to 12 weeks. Is that right, y'all?
I
think so.
believe that is right.
Yeah, so that was a good one. You just reminded me of that
Yeah.
one.
And I believe that there's going to be a study committee dealing with housing, particularly Senator James
Yes.
did the several hearings on rental units and the problems with your HOAs. Yes. So she's going to be having a study committee. And I do believe that the rental bill did get through committee as far as rental control. However, it did not go no further than that.
That's right. Yeah. Senator James will continue to do that work. That work's lived in the Urban Affairs Committee in the Senate. And she's actually done a really fabulous job of digging in on both the rent control and HOAs. On the paid parental leave, we have increased it from 120 hours to 240 hours in a 12-month period for full-time employees.
Thank you so much for that. Though I know we've made some great strides here in Georgia, some things that affect me personally and my friends. And so I appreciate the work that all of you do, but I do know we have a lot of work to continue to do in terms of bills. And so Senator Halpern, I wanted to know, what actions can we take to resist and minimize the impact or undo ugly bills that are passed?
So we are right now in the period of time where the governor has a decision to make on many of the pieces of legislation that did make it to his desk. And so there is still an opportunity that we are done with session of really trying to advocate, especially if there's bills that we believe should be vetoed, to really advocate for the governor to veto those bills. I don't remember the trigger date. One of you two might, but he has basically 40 days from the time that the we sine die to sign a bill. And remember, he's got three options. He can sign a bill into law, he can veto a bill, which rejects it, or he can do nothing, which effectively makes it a law, even without his signature. So for anything that you see that you've got concerns about, I have one. I didn't mention it before. On the licensing, we also passed a bill that would no longer require licensure from blow dry stylists. This is people who do hair, as long as they're not using a curling iron or a flat iron, they can do your hair with no license. I've got so many major concerns about this bill, and makeup artists would no longer need a license to do your makeup. So that's one I myself am going to be petitioning the governor and writing a letter and calling to the governor's office to ask him to veto that bill. So that's an example of what you can do to get the governor to stop. We're now in our interim. So now is a time where it's a great time to try to build relationships with your state legislators on both the House and the Senate side, if you don't already know who they are, and start to get to know us while we're not in the busiest part of the experience. January through March is a really hard time when we're at the Capitol. We have so many things that are coming at us fast. But when we're back at home and in our districts, we do really invite you to get to know us, and it's really helpful for you to share your own stories, because it gives us a different lens by which to approach an issue. So those are a couple of things that I would share that we can start doing now.
Thank you for that. Representative Roberts, what actions do you think that we can take to resist and minimize the impact of some ugly bills that are being passed?
I was trying to find that date. It is 40 days, but I couldn't find the date. Let's see. I agree with her. We've got it's not much time. I know the veto or the deadline is coming up very soon. I don't know. As far as undoing bills, I don't know how we do that unless we take control of one chamber. If you want to, I don't have a good answer other than we have 7 months to elect leaders that share our values and that will help us do that. And I do think if we could take control of the House, they have to talk to us because they can't get anything accomplished. And so that has been my ultimate objective, and what I'm working hard to try to accomplish is to help us flip more seats. And I think if the stars align with reproductive freedom being in the forefront of people's minds right now, I think we may see some seats that we think maybe the margin's not quite there. We could see them go if we have good candidates, and we have a lot of great candidates across the state. So I would say get out and work for candidates that are in seats that we realistically, and I'm happy to provide those to anybody who wants to reach out to me. We've got specific folks that we're working really hard for. So I wish I had something more productive than that. Our advocates are very good at, as far as they were on the ball this session, especially like when we said go. I know I reached out to Valerie Habuff, the head of the Jewish Democratic Women's Salon, about America's First because it's anti-Semitic. So she had people on the Republican and the Democratic side reaching out to legislators on both sides of the aisle, and we killed that one as well because it's just an ugly license plate to see driving around. So on the $10,000 or $10 million or whatever that Burt Jones tried to sneak into the budget to arm teachers was another example of where advocates really, I think we're galvanizing and we're organizing better than we ever have before. And so we just need to start utilizing that energy to keep the pressure up as we're going into the 2024 elections.
Thank you, Representative Roberts. Representative Davis, what are some of your thoughts on resisting and minimizing the impacts of ugly bills?
People to remember, it is your vote that hire and fire us as elected officials. It is your tax money that pay us. So in this business we call government, I don't want you to ever give up on anything. If there is a bad bill, remember the word repeal, because we can repeal it. We can restore the confidence that you want. We can rebuild a better tomorrow for generations yet to be born. If you did not vote, vote. If you know someone in your family didn't vote, motivate them to vote. It is not hard for us to flip this house. We need about what, 16 seats? How many?
Technically 13, but I don't count the one that defected, so 12. She who shall not be named.
I mean, this is within reach. We are calling out for those people who are a little apathetic or feel like it doesn't mean nothing to vote. Remember that a number of our ancestors died to get us to where we are today, and we need your help. Don't tie our hands. Help us help you and restore a lot of good laws, because we have a whole bunch of bad ones we need to repeal.
I have one more piece. Talk to people about voting down ballot, because I just got from a statewide, or I'm sorry, a national organization, sister district, whose entire objective is to flip state legislatures. She just gave me survey data that shows that we could win like 12 legislatures across the country if we could. It's the percentage of getting the drop off, getting people to vote. It's so small. And so educate people every day on why the state legislature impacts your lives probably more than the feds do right now. Everything from healthcare to education to our freedom, and make sure that we're educating our friends, people in the grocery store, wherever, that they've got to vote for their state legislatures, not just go in and vote for president.
Thank you for that.
I am wearing a t-shirt you can't read, but it does say well-behaved women rarely make history. So make your voices be heard. We are powerful. I mean, we really are. As a collective, we are powerful. So we know we've got an election ahead of us. Every single one of us is a reminder. All 236 members of your Georgia General Assembly are on the ballot this year. So we want to make sure that we are re-electing people who share our values, and then electing new people who share your values to replace the people who are working against your interests.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I have one more question for all of you. Who voted for cornbread to be the national bread for Georgia?
Only the House. Sadly, that bill did not come up in the Senate. Now, here's a funny thing about that bill. I had a bill that would have created a Georgia statewide music office, kind of a la what we've seen with the film industry, an office that's just completely focused on growing Georgia's music industry. We've got a great story to tell. That bill did not make it onto the Senate floor. So when it came time after crossover day to go shopping for a bill, that cornbread bill that had come over from the House was the bill that I chose to add my language to. It did not make it to the Senate floor. Cornbread is not the bread of Georgia, the state
The
bread.
biscuit lovers can rally for next session.
That's right.
Is it sourdough bread?
With all due respect, I love me some cornbread.
Oh, me
So,
too.
yes,
And it better be sweet.
I
at that.
voted yes.
So sweet.
I love that. I love that. I'm so glad it didn't actually go anywhere. But
Except your bill would have been good if it was attached to Senator Halper.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
had mirror bills. Represent Casey Carpenter, whose bill was the cornbread bill. He had the music bill also in the House. It didn't go anywhere, so we were not successful. But
next time.
see, every time. But you know what bill did pass? I believe. Didn't we make? Oh my gosh, the shrimp bill.
Yeah,
Yes.
the white shrimp.
Yes, the white shrimp. That one did, and
It did pass.
I don't remember if it passed or not. I'm not sure.
Oh,
It passed out of
geez.
the House. I don't know if
yeah,
it passed out.
it passed out of the Senate. It did.
Oh, okay.
Yep, it sure did. So see, another bill going to the governor's desk because we do important work down there.
Such a great use of taxpayer dollars.
So good.
Excellent.
Hi, Miss Vonda.
Hello, I'm literally laughing about the cornbread because I'm a biscuit person. So
Yeah. Well, that is a good note to wrap this up on, is something I guess positive. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what other bread was in the running. Like I said, was sourdough in there, or hoe cakes, or any of that? Okay, anyway. All right, too much. Well, thank you very much. Did someone have another comment they wanted to make, please? Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Hillary, for leading this discussion. It has been delightful, but it has been super informative. It definitely gave us the women's view. And I say that because no matter what you say, we can see just how important to all three of you this whole result has been, that the legislature is something that you obviously take seriously, and that you put your heart and your time and all your effort and hard work into, and we appreciate it. And we hate for it to not come out the way you planned. But you're going to have to all tell us in the future what we have to do to keep you there. Because I know for a fact there have been women and men who have left this job because it was horrible, because it was frustrating, just like what you've been describing to us. And we don't want any of you to leave. So if we need to bring you flowers, candy, pay for the daycare, whatever, please let us know. But Greater Atlanta Democratic Women supports you wholeheartedly. And
Gotta
again,
get out canvas for target candidates. That will be your gift to me.
well, that's
Give me
exactly
more
what
Democrats.
that's right. Flipping the Senate, flipping the House, all of that. That is one of the things that we are planning to do. You will see us very active in that. And anytime that you want to call us out to help somebody specifically, particularly if they're in Cobb, DeKalb, Fulton, or Gwinnett, we're going to be there. But we also support our sisters in all the other Georgia Federation of Democratic Women organizations. So if we need to go to Congressional District 4 or 7 or whatever, let us know. But thank you. Thank you very much. We appreciate you being here this evening and giving us your time and giving us this great report. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are recording this and we will be posting it online, and we'll let you know so that if you want to share it with your networks, you can do that as well.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you, Hillary.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming along and having this conversation with us this evening.
And thank you for the folks who joined us in the audience. And do you want to go ahead and end our recording?